Joseph Rescigno, talking about my book, Conducting Opera, Where Theater Meets Music. In the last video, I talked about how a dramatic choice or even a dynamic choice on the part of the singer can illuminate a phrase and sometimes even a scene. Well, in the orchestra, we can do similar things. Bringing out a note, changing a balance, using a certain kind of articulation can intensify a dramatic situation. I'll give you an example of how changing a balance can have a very different effect in a completely non-operatic situation. When I was 19 and studying in Italy, the great pianist Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli suggested a revoicing of the trio melody in the second scherzo of Chopin. Now, usually what you hear is this. Okay? He suggested voicing it like this. So that the tune sounds instead of which is quite different. Now, when a character in an opera is suffering great emotional pain, a good composer can sometimes put a chord or an effect in the orchestra that intensifies that feeling of pain. I'd like to give you 3 examples. One is in the final act of Puccini's La Bohème. They have brought the dying Mimi into the room where the 4 Bohemians are, Musica has. And they put her in a bed that's there. And Rodolfo, her lover, is beside himself. He's in anguish. And at a certain moment, the whole orchestra is playing. Puccini marks that forte. But he puts a certain melody, the same melody in all 4 horns, marked fortissimo. And especially the first note, that first note, I think, should stick out. It should be the anguish of Rodolfo. Usually you don't do that. You blend it, you blend the orchestra so that no one instrument sticks out. But here I make an exception. So it should sound like this. So that first note especially, it should really just pop out and sound like a stab in the heart. Also, in a Puccini opera, in this time, Madame Butterfly, in the second act, Butterfly is beside herself. She sings this aria, Che tua madre, to Sharpless, about her feelings. She's there with the little baby, and she says, no, I can't go back to being a geisha. If Pinkerton doesn't come back to me, all I want is death. Death is preferable. And The text is, ah no, no questo mai, questo mestier che a Dio non reporta. No, never this, not this dishonorable profession. Morta, morta, death, death. Mai più danzar. I don't want to dance anymore. So we hear this. Morta, morta, mai più danzar. Okay, now, on the second beat of the first two bars of this phrase, and then 2 bars later, same thing on the second beat, the violins have, and then later they have, and a crescendo is marked over them. But if you exaggerate that crescendo and make it much shorter, in other words, only one beat from their entrance, pianissimo or piano, and then make a very fast crescendo to fortissimo, 1, da, da, and the same thing later, da, ding. You will not cover her line, because you're only doing it for one beat, and it'll sound like screams. Now, sometimes the quality of the attack or the note that you're playing is important, besides the dynamic. In the second act of Wagner's Die Walküre, towards the very end of the act, there is a fight between Siegmund and Hunding. And Wotan magically breaks the sword of his son Siegmund, and Hunding kills Siegmund. Oh, it's part of an oath he made to his wife Fricka. It's a long story, I can't go. But the important part is, this is a father in anguish, seeing the death of his son and knowing that, in a very real sense, he is responsible for that death. And Wagner gives a melody to the cellos. But on the first note of that melody, they are doubled by the violas. And it's one of the very rare instances where I ask violas and cellos to exaggerate the attack, to play it almost in what would be a vulgar way. Most of the time, if you ask an orchestra to do this. The Russian string players use the word zhit, that you can hear the bow against the string, almost making a sound. And if you've heard some of the recordings of Jascha Heifetz on the violin playing fortissimo, or Rostropovich playing fortissimo on the cello, you get that idea of that aggressive sound. Here. Now, besides the quality of a single note or the dynamic on that note, one can do a little bit more tone painting sometimes with the orchestra. For example, in Mozart's opera Don Giovanni, there's a famous duettino, La ci darem la mano, with Giovanni and the young Zerlina. Now, she is absolutely moments after her wedding. And Giovanni is trying to seduce her. Now, he's older, rich, confident, and she's very nervous. Now, he gives the same accompaniment in the strings to both of them. However, if you choose to play his accompaniment, tell the strings to play alla corda, on the string, giving the note its full value. Whereas when she sings, have them play it off the string, spiccato, so it's a short, nervous kind of sound. You get this. La ci darem la mano, la mi dirai di sì. Vedilo nel lontano, partiam ben mio da qui. And here she sings, vorrei e non vorrei, mi trema un poco il cor. Felice versarei, ma può burlarmi ancora, ma può burlarmi ancora. Okay. Now, a little more tone painting. In the beginning of Salome, immediately after her first entrance, there is a phrase in the orchestra that is this. That's with everyone. Okay. What does he do? How does he orchestrate it? This phrase, sorry. He has the first violin, solo violin, without mutes, without a mute on, play in this octave. He has all the second violins with mutes play the higher line, divisi, inside and outside. And he has all the remaining first violins play that same phrase in that same octave, only tremolo, like da. Now, the second violins and the first violins playing tremolo have mutes on. The single first violin doesn't. The conductor, Eric Leinsdorf, that I was very fortunate enough, just before I conducted my first Salome, to go over the score with him, suggested that at this point, I pick a few of the first violins, maybe one outside player and two inside players, to play what he called tremolo spiccato. And I said, Maestro, that's impossible. You can't play tremolo spiccato. It has to, the bow has to rest on the string. Otherwise, it's going to be sloppy. It's going to be boom, 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 boom. He says, no, that's exactly the idea. Have just, and it's muted, have a single player on the higher note and two players on the lower. Do it like that so it sounds kind of rustly and sloppy, but then it blends in with everyone else and it sounds like the rustling of her veils. It's really quite a marvelous effect and absolutely appropriate in this instance. A few years later, I was doing Cenerentola after this, going over Salome and having done my first Salome at the suggestion of Maestro Leinsdorf. And in the first aria of Do Magnifico, the wicked stepfathers, in this version, in Rossini's version, it's not a wicked stepmother, but a wicked stepfather. He sings an aria, and he's had a dream, and he's explaining the dream. And there are feathers in the dream, there's a tower in the dream, and there's a donkey in the dream. And he says, now the donkey remains, but I am that donkey. Anyone can see clearly that your father is the ass. Same double meaning as, somaro. Okay. And what I did was, he has the, at one point, he has the first violins go. So it sounds like Resta l'asino di poi, ma quell'asino son io. I had the first violins play the first note instead of what's written, the harmonic an octave higher, and then the next note. So it's this, and slide down, imitating the braying of a donkey. So, ma quell'asino son io, chi vi guarda vede chiaro che il somaro è il genitor. Okay. Now, this last bit of tone painting, please, less is more. I do something like this, or changing the octave of an instrument, maybe in 2 or 3 cases in the 100 operas in my repertory. So please, it's very different than the choice in Giovanni, how do you articulate, or some of even the effect in Salome. But a big change like that, really be very careful. I'm in no way suggesting that, you start rewriting the great works of the past. So if you have found this discussion interesting, there are many more like it throughout my book. And so please, I encourage you to read my book and to leave a comment or a question if you desire. And finally, click subscribe or like or share or all 3. Thank you very much.